you walk into the store and you see a pack of donuts, and the though you might not be aware of it, what can be triggered is this feeling of nobody values me, but I'm going to value myself and buy that pack of donuts. A lot of times we have that like unnamed need for something. It's like that feeling of like a vacancy. There's a void that needs to be filled, and I don't really know what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's a donut-sized void. So that's probably going to do it. So what else has been going on? I mean, you said that we've had a lot happening in the.
Uh, well, I don't know if I have said anything about it. This has come up for us here in the house, what, 3 times since summer, where Susanna will let me know that Tuesday is complaining about me and saying I'm abusive and that I yell at her, um, and makes all of these allegations. Some of them really, some of them really, there's a button there still.
Yeah,
Like she'll say something about, she's accused me of being financially abusive, and that I don't work. Why doesn't he work? I'm like, Suzanne's tried to list it off. You see all this stuff? Do you want to do
yeah,
it? And of course she says no.
yeah.
Um, but what else? I can't remember. She just generates this long list of stuff, and a lot of it sounds like stuff that she hears on YouTube. Like there's this one thing called r slash where the guy reads stuff from Reddit, and frequently it's about families and family members that are having problems with each other,
Mhm.
and we both recognize, and we have for years, that she is way too suggestible. I mean, we really shouldn't. I would really think we shouldn't be letting her watch YouTube, or at least some things on YouTube, because some things she'll question, other things, a lot of it, she hears it and it just becomes true for her. And it becomes part of her view of things. They become belief systems, even if only temporarily. Now, fortunately, in all of this, Susanna has been in the room when I will say something to Tuesday, and she'll say, that I said something really awful to her, and Susanna will jump in and say, "No, he didn't. That's not at all what he said."
Mhm.
So she knows that she exaggerates and distorts. Plus, when Tuesday used to see for several years, for 5 or 6 years, she had a therapist she saw who was an autism specialist.
Mhm.
It wasn't conventional therapy. It was therapy intended to help people who are autistic to learn to manage their affairs and navigate and be able to function.
Yeah.
And this woman who had been doing it for like 30 years, she trained with the guy who was the leading person in the United States on autism. And she said, something that you may wind up dealing with is that it's better than 80% of autistic girls wind up having real issues with their fathers during their teens.
Mhm.
So we think that's playing a role, but it doesn't change the fact that on one hand, it's kind of scary because a lot of it echoes uh, things that she said when everything fell apart for us in 2020. Plus, she also said, now she stopped saying this because Susanna has asked her point blank, "Do you want to leave? What is it you want here?" And she'll
Yeah.
say, "No, I don't want that." But, since it has a connection to all of that, it still provokes some fear.
Yeah, of course.
Fortunately, it doesn't provoke the self-loathing, self-hatred. What's wrong with me? I'm the problem.
Good.
Program. At least
Yeah.
not like it used to. If it comes up, it's very mild and it doesn't last very long. But a lot of
Amazing.
times it doesn't happen at all.
Yeah, really good.
Um, so that's been coming up again. Let me see. We had a conversation about this. I guess it was about 3 weeks ago, and then it came up again earlier this week. The other thing that's fortunate is that Susanna is in a far better place than she has been, partly because of the finder's course
Hmm.
and other work of that sort that she's been doing. And then we have managed to get our relationship back to what it had been for so many years. Once
Excellent.
once we became parents, everything just kind of just the threads started pulling apart over a period of time. And now we've managed to, I think, almost completely recover from that. We're actually probably in the best place we've ever been.
That's great.
So when you have that kind of intimacy and you have that kind of unity, um, that helps. to uh, that helps to kind of assuage some of the fears that might come up, or that do come up. I mean, they don't come up all the time, but they do come up some of the time. And when they do, fortunately, um, it's not at the level it used to be, where it was really intense, feeling this incredible fight or flight or freeze, and then wrestling with that for 24, 48, 72 hours, or possibly even more. You're just carrying it around, and what am I going to do if, and how, trying to plan ahead in case everything falls apart, so that you feel like you land on your feet. um, but the thing that is, hang on,
Mhm.
as much as I really wish that that would go away, I'm really tired of it. um, uh, Things have gotten to a point where, as I put it to Susanna the other night, when it comes to feelings and emotions, all bets are off. Because will it hurt? Will I be upset? Will I be afraid? Whatever. Or will I not? If I do,
Mhm.
will it last very long? In other words, the reactions when it comes to dealing with things that are unpleasant, things that are activating, or will provoke some sort of reaction, used to be predictable. At least for myself. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by if I was upset or hurt or felt resentful, whatever. I'm like, yeah, that's that's how this that's how this person reacts. That's perfectly in line with what we've known for years. And now it's not. Now something will happen, and then either in the moment or shortly thereafter, I'll realize, wow, there wasn't any reaction at all, or there was some fear or hurt or whatever, but it wasn't so consuming and overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it doesn't tend to stick. you know like
Yeah.
an interesting turn of events was that I've had a problem with Texas boyfriend for quite some time,
Yeah.
and I don't dislike the guy. I just really resent him because of the fact that he's done things repeatedly over a period of years, and he knows that he's not supposed to, but he just keeps doing it. And some of it's been kind of sneaky. But he was over here yesterday, and Susanna has been telling me that he has started to, she's noticed that the way he conducts himself is changing. And so I had an interaction with him, and what was interesting was, one, that I didn't feel any of the resentment that I usually feel. Just him being here, just his presence, that resentment's kind of smoldering away in the background.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go, and then finally time for him to leave rolls around. It's like, good, he's gone.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case. I was able to interact with him and deal with him, and um, without any of that stuff showing up. And now, on one hand, I have been wanting to try to put that to rest for a while, but on the other, nothing conscious or intentional was done. There wasn't any sort of sense ahead of time, if he's coming over, let's try to do this, or let's try not to. There wasn't any thought beforehand. He just showed up here, and it just unfolded the way it unfolded, and there wasn't any problem.
Yeah.
And as a result, I was actually able to see some of what Susanna's talking about. And I even said to her last night, I said, maybe, because he's 17 now, maybe at this age, he's making those changes that he can't make. I mean, just nature makes them for you. They're biological, they're physiological. The brain changes, and body chemistry changes, and it's part of growing up and maturing. Maybe that's what's going on here. And I
Mhm.
saw a handful of different things, must be 5 or 6 different things, that, like, wow, that's different.
Yeah.
And so, as a result of not being resentful of his presence, I was able to see these things,
Yeah.
and a door opened where it hadn't been before. It's like, what? I'll tell you what. I told her, Susanna, last night, I'm going to talk to him, just he and I, by just the two of us without anyone else around, and let him know what I saw, and
Yeah.
that if he he wants to earn my trust, that's how you do it, and I'm
Yeah.
willing to give him that chance.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So
And spot on, well done for having that freshness where instead of seeing him just as all of the interactions that you have had before, you recognize that everybody is always changing, especially when you're in your teens, like you said,
yeah,
all sorts of things happening. But to have that instead of being colored by the resentment of all of your past encounters, it's like, oh yeah, okay. I actually recognize there's something there that I hadn't seen before. There's something there that's maybe redeemable. That
yeah,
that's wonderful.
and it's to me, it's been interesting. If someone else's may not be interesting at all, but it's been interesting watching how reactions and responses change, and how things in the emotional and in that realm of feeling and emotion are how those things unfold now. Because for somebody who has decades, well, 2 decades of history with AA, and how resentment is dealt with in that community, when it comes to resentment, that's the default way of thinking about it. But we've been talking about this stuff, and I've been working with it for a little over a year now, and so I sort of instinctively knew, okay, there's going to be another way to deal with this. And I was trying to imagine what you would say about it, what kind of feedback or suggestions you would make. And I couldn't, some things I could, but I couldn't imagine what you'd say specifically to that. So I just thought, I'm just going to try to be open with this and see what happens. Um, because, if you leave things alone and just let them take their own course, and this wasn't in response to him, this was just in general thinking about resentments and how to deal with them, because it's something that I became aware recently, that that there are some resentments lurking around, which that was kind of strange, because for a very long time I just didn't have any resentment. I managed to just kind of keep that stuff dealt with. So you know in doing this kind of work, it couldn't be any more different from what's done in AA. In fact, because of the way that we approach things when doing this kind of work, it made me realize that you can do all of the work around a resentment in AA and then still not have uncovered the actual source of whatever is generating that. And Tuesday's boyfriend, that was a prime case, because after he had left yesterday and I was thinking about everything that had happened during the day, I realized that, if I had done that from the typical AA point of view, there's this thing with him that would have, regarding he and I, that was getting totally overlooked, you know, and you could do all that work around resentment until until you're blue in the face, and all it would ever be is just kind of a band-aid measure, because it somehow fails to get the actual thing that is driving all of that, that's generating it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and there's two things there. One is that, like what we do is so much about getting into the raw experience of that interaction and what's happening in the body and how it's relating to things. We go deeper with that. But then the other thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume because with AA, there's, the component of like making amends and that sort of thing. There's a lot of like story related to it. Like there's a lot of like, I have done these things and I have done this to this person and that is still existent. So to where you're making amends to dead people at times, like, right? Like
Yeah,
so there's a belief in the reality of me having done a thing to somebody else in the past and to the reality of the story. Whereas what you're recognizing here is that her boyfriend is a different boyfriend now than he was at another time. And so when we
yeah,
have that freshness of approaching people and situations new each time without all of the baggage and the burden of, well, he did this and he said that and I did that and I should always feel bad because I did that thing 30 years ago and same person here now who needs to learn and all of that. Like all of that is continuing that thread of self and that idea of continuation over time.
Hmm.
And what we're talking about here is that freshness of like, oh, there's a polite young man in my house. He took the garbage out on his own. Whatever it is, it's like if we're coming at it with all of the baggage of every bad thing we remember a person doing and all of the reasons why we think we hate them, and then we completely overshadow those aspects. And likewise, it works the other way too. I mean, people can get into really toxic relationships because it's like, oh, but he loved me, and we used to really love each other, and it's, I can overlook the fact that he's cheating or abusing me in some way or yelling at me every night because we had such good years. We can do that same thing where we're not aware of our actual situation, how it really is now, and really honest about this actual interaction, and making choices or living from that, because we're stuck in remembrances of a past, and thinking that me and that person are exactly the same as we used to be. It's just not the way it is. So you're coming more in terms of the or in line with the reality of every time you see him, it is a different person. And every time you are interacting with him, you are a different person. And that interaction is going to be different from moment to moment and day to day.
Hmm.
And so it's just to get underneath that idea of resentment, where that resentment can only exist if there's a belief in a history and a story and the memory that's there. You can't resent somebody if you have no memory of ever meeting them, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're
So
right.
so all of that has to be there in order for that resentment to exist. Even if
That,
you're
and
not
that,
Yeah, even if you're not actively like cataloging all of the times that he said or done things that you didn't like, when you said like, you'd be there like the resentment would be churning away, like, oh, when is he going to leave? That is that thread of memory that's continuing that. Like, oh, there's that little bastard again, when's he gonna, like that's all that idea that's in there. And it's all because of some form of memory, overt or covert, that happens to be active in that moment.
yeah, no, you're right. And I'm glad you said that because that was the element with regards to resentment that I've been trying to put my finger on that I couldn't couldn't quite nail well not couldn't quite I couldn't nail down at all. I was
Mhm.
completely overlooking it, but I knew that there was something at work there. What is it that makes a resentment possible, and what is it that makes it so that it can maintain over time? And there's the answer to it right there. The other side of that is, of course, all of that's true, that a person is different every time that you're dealing with them. It's funny because a door opened with him, but Tuesday is so she says it she said it so many times that I almost think it's a point of pride with her. She'll talk about how she holds grudges,
Mhm.
and so she holds grudges. She bears these resentments, and she's gotten all of these ideas that she's generated about me, which, I mean, somebody out hearing this on the outside or somebody listening to this on YouTube might think, well, there's something there he's not saying, or there's something he's not being honest about something. But really, that's not the case. If, for reasons that are unclear to both Susanna and I, she's got all of these issues around me. I know what they are, but I don't understand why they have such life that still, as of now, I can't. Um, it interferes with the ability to interact with her because all she sees is this story that she's generated around me. It all
Mhm.
comes down to, never in my life have I met any person that resents being parented as much as she does. She resents being parented. She resents brush your teeth, go to bed. It's your turn to take care of the dishes, whatever. Let the dogs in, or help me go, get the dogs in, whatever. I mean, she just deeply resents all of it. She
Yep.
doesn't want to be told what to do, no matter how kind, gentle, polite, relaxed you are about it. To the point that the change we've made here in the last few weeks is, Susanna was always sort of the backup, and I was the primary. Um, and now we've reversed that. Even though she's busy with, 40, 50, 60 hours a week of work, um, now she's the one who's playing the primary parent and, letting her know letting Tex know what she needs to do. I've had to go almost completely hands off because Tuesday has such resentment about it,
Mm.
and so I walk on eggshells around her because she misinterprets a good percentage of what I say.
Mm.
Um, it happens regularly. If I'm just speaking freely, I'll say something that's going to rub her the wrong way, upset her, piss her off. And so I walk on eggshells. I kind of give her a wide berth. And if I see something that needs to happen and Susanna's overlooking it, I'll send her a text or an email and say, hey, needs to be addressed. But I don't, unless I just don't have any option, I don't say anything to Tuesday about it.
Does sound like that's probably the best course of action at this point, because if you never have any control over how she sees you or interprets you or any of that, and that's
Yes, I do not.
sad fact. And we're all like that all the time with people. I think it's more obvious in your case, but it's always how it is. Always, I mean, it's just an absolute truth of existence. We cannot affect how other people see us or interpret or hear what we say or do. Um, that's where we talk about giving people the freedom to experience what they experience, to have their interpretations of us, because what we've talked about so much is the problem in the past has been that her interpretations of you trigger your interpretations of you, and it puts you in this place where she says you're a certain way and you're like, yeah, yeah, I guess I am actually, like there's a part of you that agrees. and,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a problem. So we can only allow people to have that freedom of opinion about us when we are very confident on our opinion about us, and it's unshakable by external forces.
Well, I was telling Susanna the other night that because she was telling me about more recent things that Tuesday had gone on with saying, and I pointed out to her and let her know that you know there's really not there's very little, if any, of the whole "you're the problem, you're the bad guy" stuff that gets activated by what she says. What creates a problem now is, one, like I said, that it ties into that time period where things led up to everything falling apart in our family. And then the other thing is, when she says things to Susanna like, "Oh yeah, yeah, okay," because I'm quote unquote abusive. Why aren't you protecting me from him?
Mm,
And of course, that with Susanna's history and her trauma,
right.
it sets Susanna off. Now, fortunately, she recognizes what's going on in her, and that it's just a reaction based on things in the past. It doesn't have anything to do with what's going on now. She can set it aside. But the fact that it's even said, I feel like what's happening is my daughter is fooling around, playing fast and loose with my relationship, which precedes her time on this planet by a couple of decades.
Mm.
um, and so those are the things that get stirred up rather than the whole bad guy spiel.
Which
So
is good. I mean, that's
yeah.
a huge, that's a huge shift. That's a huge
Yes.
improvement. Now, as far as the concern about her affecting your relationship by that, I understand your concern, especially, given where the relationship was it 4 years ago, something like that, uh,
Right.
5 years ago. Um, I think it's important to remember that she's not really doing it on purpose for that reason,
uh,
right? The way that you phrase it comes out that she's playing fast and loose with it, like she's
mhm.
actively trying to manipulate it. We don't know what's going on in her in her mind. Her psychology is such that she's seeing things and hearing things in a way which is very different from you are. Some of that has to do with the fact that she's in her teens. Another has to do with the fact that she's autistic and however that happens to be, affecting her perceptions. Um, there is like I've talked, Pernilla says all the time, one big issue, and this might be kind of related to what you say, is her being very persuadable or suggestible, is like Pernilla says, basically autists generally don't lie, and they don't really, it doesn't really occur to them that lying is a thing. So Pernilla growing up was always super gullible because if somebody said something, she just assumed it was true. So it was like, okay, so then you just take it
Huh.
on as truth. So if Tuesday has that aspect of her, you know, of the autism, where she's listening to stuff on YouTube and everything that she hears is true, then of course it's like immediately taken on as, well, yeah, this applies to my life. I see how that is, and clearly they're not going to lie. It's on the internet, so it must be true. And it doesn't. If that happens to be part of her world, then of course everything she hears is just pointing back to the fact that you're a problem in some way, and everything that she's hearing is reinforcing that. So we have to, you know, as unfortunate as it is for the situation where if you're not doing these things and being, unjustly accused of doing things that you're not doing, we can still have that compassion for the fact that that is her worldview. And the what's important is that that what she's saying isn't true. And Suzanne knows that what she's saying isn't true. So that shouldn't be able to affect your relationship with each other, because you both know that whatever Tuesday sees in this regard is true to her, but it's maybe
Mhm.
not true to the dynamics of the household at large. And as long as Susanna isn't also picking up on it and seeing the same thing, which, if you have two people who are seeing the same, then we have to question the third party in the room, if whether they're
Right.
right. But as long as it's in that sort of range, I don't see how that's going to really affect your relationship in the long term, especially if you're, currently sort of the most solid that you've been. So notice that, check in when you have that triggering that happens. Is it based off of the reality of this moment where your relationship really is in danger by her saying something, or is this just a re-triggering of fear based off of where your relationship was 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, two things. First of all,
Yeah.
I desperately wish Tuesday had that trait of not lying. She
Oh
used to
yeah.
be that way. She used to be that way, but starting somewhere around 12 or 13, she gradually started to learn how to do that, if that's what it was that happened, and become very comfortable with it. Because there was a point in time when she said something that was untrue. She was really uncomfortable with it because there's an outrageously high premium on that in our house.
Yeah.
And so she would be really uncomfortable. You could see it in her body language. Now you can still hear it in her voice and see it in her body language, but she's gotten better at it as she's gotten more comfortable with it. And I remember the first time she looked me in the eyes and told me something I blatantly was untrue. I remember feeling a degree of shock. It's like, how did you get to that?
Yeah.
How did you get okay with that?
Of all the skills that she could develop, maybe that was the one that didn't need that much attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is it is provoking or activating um, that fear based in the past, but the particular form it takes, I think, is potentially kind of thorny because what it provokes, what it brings up, is when everything fell apart in 2020. Um, first of all, I never thought Suzanne and I would ever come to that ever. I mean, I always had just this deeply held belief. I mean, it was just absolutely true. It was more true than anything else that we had made a commitment and we were going to see it through, and everything about our lives had always pointed to that because we always worked everything out no matter what it was. And we
Mhm.
managed to work through some, on a couple of occasions, some pretty hairy stuff, and come out the other side better for it. And uh, so everything fell apart, and that was just probably one of the single most shocking things ever in my life. I just didn't think it was possible. And the result of that was this learning that truly, truly nothing in the known universe is stable. Doesn't matter how much you think it's stable, it's reliable. It's not. In fact, I was thinking about it a few days ago, and I don't know if you've ever heard how Ajahn Chah refers to impermanence. He refers to it as everything is uncertain. I never quite got that. And
Yeah,
then the other day, it hit me. Oh, that's what he means.
yeah,
I
yeah.
could see it from that angle,
Yep.
and that's what came of that, was really learning about the absolute uncertainty of everything.
Yeah.
And so it when that gets activated, that's what's happening there, is it's hitting that uncertainty. So yeah, it's fear based in the past, but it's also touching on something that actually we know in the larger sense is true. And
Yes.
so that for me, it makes it kind of difficult how to work with that.
But remember the other side of that is that because everything is uncertain, there is a, a need to let go of the attachment to things.
Yes.
That's why that's such a primary tenet in Buddhism is letting
Mm-hmm.
go of that attachment because yes, it is wonderful to be in a relationship and to have things going well.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that, like you just said, everything is uncertain. And if we cling to things being exactly as they are now and not allow them, if for whatever reason things are going to go otherwise, if we're going to cling to, but it was better then, I need that again, I can't be okay, then we're in that place of suffering, in that place of um, danger. So what we're really aiming for is the recognition of uncertainty, but having that, well, two things. One is that with that comes that even if things go bad again, that's not necessarily a certain end, right?
Right.
We're jumping to the conclusion that like things are good, they can go bad. Oh no, life is over. We don't know the twists and turns and peaks and valleys that are going to be in any relationship or job or anything that we do in our life, right? It's all open and subject to change. So having that recognition that just because something seems bad now does not mean that it's the end or that it's going to be the worst case scenario, that gives us some kind of emotional freedom from which to move. But then when you have that idea about um it needs to be a certain way forever, then feeling into that uncertainty that is here in the moment, it's that discomfort. So uncertainty is fine, right? The fact that you may or may not get cancer is it's an open ball game, and we usually go on the well, it's a possibility that I won't. I'll choose to cling to that one, as opposed to the possibility that I can, unless we're kind of neurotic and maybe even uh, hypochondriac, and so then I'm going to cling on to, well, it's probably cancer. Yeah, I have an itchy toenail. It's probably cancer. Then we go to that realm. But it depends on what we want to get out of it. If you want to have just an easy, carefree life where you are only dealing with what's here right now, you just be with what's here right now, and you don't go to the extreme of either of those. If you want to get caught into one attachment of a possible future, then we have 50-50 chance of it being cancer or non-cancer. So you might as well latch on to the non-cancer at that point. If you are then really want to get down to not having to have any of this in your field of vision, come into the body and recognize that all of that concern about the relationship falling apart or not, having cancer or not, becoming homeless or not, the earth ending in a fireball or not, all of that comes down to a sensation in the body right now that feels uncomfortable. There's something here right now that is that associated with what we call fear or dread or worry or concern, something there has a sensation that's physically in the body that is causing the mind to go to all of these possible alternatives of, well, this might happen, so how can I prevent this? This might happen, so how can I prevent this? I'm trying to keep myself safe because this feeling in the body is telling me I'm in danger. So all we have to do is to really have that openness, that sort of spacious capacity, that open awareness in which those sensations are free to come up, do their thing, and then fade away. And none of that actually is telling you anything about a future. It's not really
Right.
telling you about a relationship. It's not telling you about the possible dangers of Tuesday saying something or not. It's actually just a discomfort in this moment that you can hold the exact same way that you've been holding the irritation when she says something or when something comes up, or the feelings of craving for a donut or whatever else. When those things come, you can recognize there's all this space that's not that. It's just this temporary thing in the body. And this is pointing to that same idea. It's that same sensation. It's just that this has to do with this undercurrent of, I need to keep myself safe for something. I need to keep things predictable. I need to have some sense of stability in life. And ultimately, we cannot. And the only way to come to terms with that, we can, like I said, gaslight ourselves into, well, I'm never going to get cancer. I'm never going to die. All my relationships are great now, so they're always going to be great. And haha, we can do that. But ultimately, when something does change, we're now smacked off that pedestal, and now we're, you know, have no way to deal with it. So what we do is to just have that openness of, this is the way things are right now. And this is the way things are right now. I can handle how things are right now. And like we've talked about in the past, having that um, feeling of security that, like, I know I can handle whatever happens, mostly because you
Yeah.
can bring it back to what is really here at any given moment. Even physical pain is just one moment of sensation. Another moment of sensation might come, but all you ever have to deal with is a single moment of sensation. All you ever have to deal with is a single moment of one situation at a time. Um, so so instead of making it into um, this whole thing where she is manipulating you guys, and this could break up, and then it could influence the relationship in this way going forward, because you can feel now what it felt like then when you were on the verge of breaking up.
Mm.
This is just a protection to keep from feeling that discomfort again. So can you feel the discomfort?
Right. That's just a protection to keep from feeling that discomfort.
Yeah, that you had back in 2020, right?
How so?
That was a very uncomfortable thing, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So the mind now is basically looking for any way to keep that from happening again, because that
Right.
was really, really uncomfortable. So now
Mm.
it's like it's going to create a villain in the situation who maybe has to change the way she is. It's trying to create all sorts of, like, how do I shore up my relationship with Suzanne so that we're not in danger of that happening again. Uh, it, I'm sure it can come up with lots of other options, but it's basically the attempt at trying to keep um, a sense of security and balance within this relationship, so that you don't feel that pain of having it fall apart.
Sense of balance and security. Huh. Okay. This may seem like I'm missing something obvious,
Sure. No, no.
but how so? I mean, how is the way I'm reacting to things in the moment um, doing that? Because I'm not seeing the protective mechanism against some imagined future.
Well, the minor discomfort that you're feeling now in that
Mm-hmm.
situation, like when you said that she's, playing fast and loose with your relationship, I'm
Mm-hmm.
I venture a guess that there is a sensation that is arising in the body that comes up with that idea that
Yeah.
he is kind of manipulating it, that is effectively the protection of trying to get you to do something to change this situation so that she doesn't completely destroy the relationship, sending you back to that pit of, painful despair from 2020.
So you're saying that the sensation that arises in response to what she's saying is something that's basically saying non-verbally, take action, go and do something, protect yourself.
Exactly. It's a
Okay.
warning
All
light.
right.
It's that warning
I
that's
see.
coming up in the system being like, no, I don't want to go have this. I know where this heads. I don't want that again. You better step up, dude. Do something. It's that kind of sensation that's coming up to protect you from feeling what you felt then. But it's under the assumption that it actually knows that this is possible in the future. And it doesn't. The problem is that these sensations are not omniscient.
Mhm.
We assume that because it's there, it must be telling us something relevant that I have to actually follow up on. But it doesn't.
No, that's just what the mind is doing with it.
Exactly. And so it's helpful to remember that all the time.
Well, there's some good news in all of this
Yes.
because what in the last month, this has come up twice. And in both instances, I, within a fairly short period of time, the conclusion I came to was, or the conclusion that appeared was that if things, if that's where things are going to go at some point in time in the future, if that is what happens, then so be it.
Hmm.
All I can do right now is it was a decision, it seemed. You either decide you're going to go ahead and just surrender
Hmm.
and take your chances, and whatever comes will be whatever comes. And you just do this from a place of, hey, you know what? I love this person. I care about them. So I will, they're worth the risk. I'm going to go ahead and take the risk, and I will just give myself to this fully with the idea that whatever happens happens, and if it ultimately doesn't go well, which ultimately it doesn't in these things, I mean, no one gets out alive, then that's fine. Then let that happen, because if that day shows up, well, you were willing to take that risk because you felt that they were worth it and you cared about them,
Yeah.
and it's all done from a place of love.
Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
that's two times I've come to that conclusion, and have basically been able to set aside the fear and think, okay, all right, well, I'm just gonna jump off that ledge, see where I land.
It's amazing. That's amazing.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, however we get to it, it's really about that absolute acceptance that we do not know what's going to happen in the next moment. And we just can't. And it's really about having that security in us that whatever happens is going to be okay. We can handle whatever happens. That's all the equanimity is about. It's never about not having another broken leg or, you know, getting caught in a I don't know, tornado. Whatever it is, like things will happen. Relationships will break up, people will die. All of that is natural. It's just, can we handle it if it happens? Yeah, I can be equanimous with whatever happens. I can recognize the all of the sensations and thoughts in this moment, and this is how it is. And it's ultimately just a recognition of reality as it actually stands in that moment. Also helps to notice how much we're coloring that reality with based off of our wants for it to be otherwise or um, assumptions about how we think it is, which is really what leads us to not being equanimous. Or I should say, it's the only thing that keeps us from being equanimous is all of the I want it to be different than it is. That, it shouldn't be like this. I'm resistant to it because I know it could be different. No, it actually couldn't. Otherwise, it would be.
right.
You know, um, it's that ultimate acceptance of the facts in front of us, but to I think to get there, we have to know ourselves enough, or we have to know this biological entity with all of its habitual thought patterns and stuff well enough to recognize, even in any situation, whether you are having an argument with your wife or you know, a friendly banter or anything else, recognizing that that interaction is colored on both of your sides by your own pasts and your own, the way that the mind works and all of that, and that
Right.
no interaction is just purely felt exactly the same from both sides. And so in any given situation, we can come to an acceptance of it, but also recognize that it's probably not the way that I think it is.
Hmm. That's an interesting and worthwhile thing to try to keep in mind.
Yeah, we can always question, how much of this situation is actually the way that I immediately interpret it, and how much has some sort of coloration, some sort of assumption built into it, some sort of, me putting the past on top of it, like we talked about with Tuesday's boyfriend. You're
Yeah.
now having moments where you can actually see him however he is in that moment without all of the past coloration. And then we do that like all the time. It's just walk outside. Oh, it's kind of an overcast day. I feel blah, blah, blah. Well, is it really, a depressing day? Or is it just that it looks a little, the sky is gray? It feels a little damp. How much of that projection are we putting on the actuality of the day? Can you see the shimmering sort of rainbow hue in those gray clouds? Can you actually be
Mhm.
so present with whatever's there that it starts to take on this feeling of beauty, or peacefulness or contentment with however it is? So we can always question how much of my initial assumption is actually true. How much of my experience of anything is actually real, and how much is just my projections are adding on to it.
Hmm. It's funny because I tend to think fairly often with regards to other people about the bubble of reality, but I don't tend to apply it to myself as much.
That's
Even though I know
commendable.
it's true, I know it's there. I tend to overlook that one, and I guess it doesn't really matter why it is, but that tends to be the habit. So
But that's such a powerful one, because yeah, it's helpful to know that, other people judging us and criticizing us may or may not be really about our actions or, behaviors. It's probably something from their side too. But what is so important about the bubble of reality from that internal perspective is it's where it starts to get into, well, it has threads in the first fetter, the fourth and fifth, the sixth and the eighth. There's this whole thing where it's everything that we can, and seventh, I should say, it's largely the seventh, that I am creating the world for myself all the time. It
yeah,
is, you know, it is, we say like there's a mirror on the inside of the bubble because it's only reflecting us and our assumptions and thoughts and histories and likes and dislikes and all of that. But it's there's no way to have a completely objective view of anything, anybody, the world around us. And we
right.
really have to remember all the time that whatever I'm seeing in any situation is my projection. It's not the way things really are. It's my projection of how things are. You
That's a good reminder.
and when Tuesday is, saying things about you, it's good to remember that she is seeing you through her veil, through her bubble, through her perceptual filter, but that you are also hearing her through your perceptual filters, right?
Wow, didn't think about that.
You're not actually hearing what she's saying. You're hearing
Right.
what you think she's saying. There's like
Hmm.
least two levels of filtering on any experience. You've got the person and their expression of their filtered reality, and then you have your interpretation of what you're hearing of their expression of their filtered reality through your own filtered reality. So we're just getting
Hmm,
more and more removed from the actuality of any experience.
I see. Huh. Well, of course, there's no way to ever, no matter how much of that we can set aside or drop, we can never get to the actual thing itself.
No, no, this
Hmm.
is what we have. It's
Yeah,
really more of a recognition that our experience is colored. It's filtered, and the more we become aware of our own habits of coloring, the more we can start to see, okay, well, maybe it's not that way. Like, for instance, you've said you have a baseline of like the world is unsafe.
hmm,
So your view of everything in the world comes through that filter of unsafety. There is danger, there's uncertainty, there is something that needs to be protected from. So
right.
all of your experience as you take in everything has that filter involved. But getting to recognize that, okay, I can see that, this unsafety alarm is going off all the time. Let me step back, see what's actually here. Am I really unsafe? Yes, an asteroid might hit the Earth. Yes, we might have you know, there might be some viral outbreak right now that nobody has even heard of. That's some, deadly thing which is already in the house, and I just haven't, it takes 6 months to affect us, and we don't even know that we're just sitting ducks at this point, right? The mind can generate all sorts of possibilities of threat. But in your actual experience in this moment, are any of those real? Are any of those really uh, tangible or can you actually find any of them, or are they at this moment just the product of the mind, of the imagination? So we come down and start to check in with our experience more and more to see, all right, so I'm driving and I have this feeling of unsafety. What around me is actually unsafe right now? Yes, accidents do happen, but is there anybody around me who's acting erratic? Is there something that I'm missing that is, an actual danger? Is my engine light on, or or my brakes failing? Like, is there something like actively there, or is this just that perceptual filter of unsafety that's just kind of working when it's not really relevant? So we notice, is this relevant? Okay, so I can calm down in this moment because I'm driving. I'm doing everything as safely as possible. Yes, unexpected things happen, but that feeling of tension isn't going to stop a drunk driver from, coming in from another street where we don't see them. It doesn't actually help the situation. It just puts us on this alert where we're actually less able to interact to react appropriately at a time because we're, caught up in all sorts of other confusions. So coming down to, in any given moment, is this filter actually real? Can start to change that we're basically reconditioning the system so that over time, hopefully there will be less belief in that feeling of unsafety everywhere. And that you can start to like, okay, so I recognize this is a you know, consistent product of the system, that there's this feeling of uncertainty or unease or unsafety that's here. I can allow that to be there. Thank you for being there. But we don't have to give it that attention that we always give it. And over time, it's probably going to be less and less active because we find we just don't need it. The more you can be present with things as they are without that label, that's one less filter that's constantly clouding your judgment and overlaying the system. There are countless others, but the ones that are the most prominent like that really become those, foundational hallmarks of our existence, where I'm always a scapegoat, or I'm always unsafe, or I'm, always unworthy, something that's always there. We just question it over and over again in every situation to find it's not actually relevant. It's not true. It's not talking about anything that's here. It can relax. You can feel the sensations. You don't have to drive them away. You can have that spaciousness to allow those sensations to be there. They'll go on their own. The thoughts can come, the thoughts can go, but without giving them that extra energy or that that belief that we once had in their validity, they're able to just pass through. They come, they pass through. We stay with what is actually present in our surroundings. And
And
so,
so
yeah,
by doing that, what you're saying is, well, let me be more specific.
yeah,
By continually coming back to what's actually happening right here, right now, and checking and seeing, okay, what's unsafe, and kind of cataloging and seeing that, well, there's nothing that's actually an actual threat right now, that through repetition of that, it reconditions the system and that begins to, okay,
yep.
hmm,
It's
all right.
basically what we're doing with a lot of these things, with these really ingrained, primary patterns of behavior or thinking. They just haven't been questioned. They've been something where we're constantly reacting from them because that's how I became agoraphobic years ago. It was because, I'd feel there was like a little threat of something. I'd go out and there would be this little threat of unease. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
clearly I am then in danger. I see somebody walk towards a car. I feel unease. Clearly they are going to come mug me, rob me, do something. I have to get out of here. Okay, I'm just going to stay in the house because every time I go out of the house, I start to get this feeling of danger, right? Like, must be that. But then the problem was I started getting that feeling of danger just being in the house. And so it becomes where, with agoraphobia, your world just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks to where you have fewer and fewer safe spaces. And then eventually you might have no safe spaces at all. And then it just becomes absolute torment because it's like I
Wow.
have a panic attack just being in the house with nothing going on. And it's
Huh.
all because there's this just overstimulation of this fear response or that feeling of unsafety that would be there. And then the mind would start creating all of these narratives to fill in the gap because there was never anything around me that was really unsafe. So the mind fills in the gaps and it's like, well, maybe it's that. Well, maybe it's that. Well, did you hear that sound outside? It's probably someone coming to break in. You better freak out. Like it would be that kind of a thing, and it just gives you that amping up, amping up. We actually I had a talk with Pernilla about this yesterday because it was last night. I went out to put the garbage bins down. It was nighttime. It was dark, and I just had that feeling of like being watched. Like it was this feeling there was something else there, and I could just feel in the body this like heightened sense of And I went up and I got like the trash cans from the house because I put the bins down and I got the trash cans from the house and I could just feel as I was coming up like the front door, it was just getting kind of like stronger and stronger. And I don't know what I didn't know what it was or any of that. But when I came in, we talk a lot of times about like shaking the body to like shake off and it really works. Like so I came in and there was just such a feeling of like like the nervous system was just like amped up for some reason. So it just shook. It was gone. Like, okay, great. And we were talking about it, and she was saying, we do, for whatever reason, often know when we're being observed by something. And she's like, it
I've heard.
could be a person, it could be a squirrel, it could be a bird. We don't really know what it is that's observing us, but the body reacts to it like, oh, you're being watched, you better, care. The funny thing was, like, I don't know, an hour or something later, we have a Facebook group for just people on the street, and
Hmm.
somebody posted a thermal image video from their backyard about 5 houses down from here. There's a bobcat going
Aha.
in the neighborhood, and I was like, oh, I think I was being watched by a bobcat.
There
I
you have.
think that's where and so the body like knew it was like there was something going on and it just like was kind of amping up. I couldn't tell what was there, but just like, okay, get in the house. Okay, fine now. And instead of making it into some, story that would have been in the past, like it would have just escalated into, some dire threat. I mean, I had a whole, yeah, there's a whole story. I even wrote like a really bad, very short screenplay about it because it was like years ago. I had amped up in my mind something where a car backed out of a driveway quickly down the street, and
Uh-huh.
then a couple cops came. And they came to the, like one came to the house and another came to the house, and I was mowing the lawn the whole time that this was going on, and basically had worked up in my mind over the course of those coming hours that whoever it was probably broken into the house, murdered the people who lived there. Why were there two cops coming, like two independent cop cars? Must be something really serious. And then, like, I was mowing the lawn, so they must have seen me in the rear view mirror, and they know I could ID the car and saw who they were. So they're gonna come back to kill me. And like, so then, like, I'm like mowing the lawn, and I'm like watching for for like the same kind of vehicle, and then all of a sudden I see a vehicle parked across the street that I like don't remember being there, and I freak out, and I come in, and then it's like I'm like closing the curtains and stuff because I'm like, like, and they're going to be able to tell which house I was at because I have the freshly mowed lawn, and like it spiraled into this completely insane paranoia, and none of that was true. Like absolutely none of it turned out to be true. And that's how completely unhinged the mind can become. It was taking it to an extreme, but it's that same sort of pattern of behavior. And we do it just on a smaller level all the time.
You realize you're describing a Hitchcock movie, right?
Yeah, yeah, completely. And that was in this case, it was just the people who lived there. They had a son who was involved with drugs, and he had kind of, come and whatever, and they called the cops on him. And it had nothing to do with me, nothing to do, I actually met the guy afterwards, very sweet guy. Like it was just a bad, situation. Nothing to do with, the reality that the mind had concocted, but it had created so much that for days I was like on edge, paranoid that,
Wow.
yeah. So it can really get out of hand very quickly if we're
So I see.
allowing this.
So, hang on. There are two things. Um, well, maybe the other one will come back to me. Um, so, when it comes to the stuff that we've been talking about for the last 6 weeks or so, regarding Fetters 4 and 5, and um, the thoughts that get believed that lead us to do a variety of things. In my case, we've been talking about this um, rather absurd business of coffee and donuts.
Completely.
But it can be other things, and I it's interesting to see how I'll catch it in some instances. Like for instance, I've got a real thing for licorice.
Yeah,
I mean the real stuff, the stuff that
yeah,
people find offensive.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Um, so I keep it on hand, and it started to become habitual. And then so I started catching myself, like just the mind making the noise internally about, go grab a couple of pieces. I'm like, well, I don't have to do that. And so there are times when I wouldn't. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
it's amazing.
But there are other times, actually, there are two sides to this. They may be two separate things, but I don't think so. That's not how I've understood it. There are two sides to this. So I'll try to lay this one out and then get to the second one. So the first one is the thoughts. Um, and, there are times where I can see that it's just a thought and just kind of sidestep it and just going about my business without having to be um, um, dictated to by whatever the mental voice comes up with.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are other times where I can't think of a good example, but something will happen, something will be done, and I'll realize, well, that was just a thought. I didn't have to do that. There wasn't that wasn't a requirement,
Yeah.
and it's kind of uh, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm not sure what the word is for it. I started to say mildly annoying, but I don't know that that's really it. There's some sort of sense at the time like, yeah, there's a choice there, and but as long as that's going unchallenged or unseen, there's not a choice.
Hmm.
And so there, I guess there's some sort of sense of um, frustration or disappointment or something. And it's funny, the sneaky one, and I recognize it's just the same thing. It's just thoughts, but for some reason it manages to trip me up. Okay. For instance, I can walk into the convenience store near our house and I can walk past the rack with all the donuts in it and I can look at it and go, nah, and I mean, this can go on for days on end,
Yeah, yeah.
3, 4, 5 days of this. And then day 4 or 5, I walk past it and you haven't had one in a few days. It's why not? Next thing you know, I'm into it. And I realized after the fact, why am I buying into this?
Uh-huh.
And at first, for a week or so, maybe longer, it was, I'm getting tripped up by this. I'm getting snared by this. And then it hit me just a couple of days ago. Well, it's not any different than all the other thoughts. It's just a variation on the theme.
Exactly.
So it's just another thought. But that seems like that can go on almost endlessly, where the mind can come up with a new way of presenting the same
Oh,
old stuff, and so you're getting caught in it and not realizing it.
yeah, of course.
So it just seems like it kind of just goes on and on and on, this business of not getting caught up in thoughts like, oh, well, I got a new one for him, watch this.
Uh-huh. Well, it's still, I think, because you still haven't gotten down to the core of what the donut is supposed to be serving for you. You know, what purpose it has. Before I get into that, I am curious too, um, during the like 3 to 5 days of donut abstinence, did you find that you were having any sort of feelings of deprivation or that it was like a forced abstinence that you were staying away from it?
No, no, it was fairly easy. I mean, I could go into said convenience store, walk past it, and there may or may not be thoughts. If they were, I was like, oh, there are those thoughts. You know, hmm,
Yeah.
wow, that's BS.
Yeah.
Just keep on going. Just
Amazing.
not getting caught up in it, just not buying it.
So what was going on at that time when you had the, oh, it's been a few days. You've been doing good. Why not have one? Was there anything going on differently that day than there was on the days before?
At this point, I wouldn't know. I would have to pay attention when that happens again in the future. Um, and it's a hard call because we've had like the first hour or so we've been talking. We've been talking about some of the ups and downs,
Yeah.
and uh, that may or may not play into it. I really don't know.
I would be curious for you to keep an eye on it and see when those come up, if there is something else happening, if there's, more emotional instability at home or more feelings of, like we've talked about in the past, that there's the feeling of like needing to do something kind for yourself and stopping off and getting a cup of coffee or something. Is there something where you were feeling in some sort of a minus or like, I deserve a treat or anything like that that might have been underneath the surface that gave that thought a little bit more believability or oomph?
I'll keep an eye out for it, but I'm sitting here now. The only thing I can see is just simply that I managed to go 3, 4 days or so without it, which you know it wasn't all that long ago that that wasn't possible. I mean, if the mind
Yeah,
caught that idea up, it was a done deal. It was happening. That's what we're going to
yeah,
do. And so for a while there, I felt very very trapped by those thoughts, and so now I don't feel so trapped by them. Uh,
yeah.
so the best I can tell you is it just seems like um, there's some idea in the mind that since it's not something that is um, so compulsive and um, a foregone conclusion anymore, that it's okay within certain limits. And a lot of people would say there is, but you know, that's not really the way that this person cares to live.
Yeah, well, and again, it's not to say there's anything wrong with an occasional donut if you decide you want that in your life. It's more of a question for what we're doing of just to seeing because again, the donut is not a donut. The donut is a metaphor. So
Hmm.
there's something. First question that comes up is why is it only around the donuts there? Why isn't it that? Why isn't that thought of well, you haven't had one, you could come up happening when you see a Twinkie?
Well, and it has happened with other things in the past.
Mm.
It's just there's this tendency for Darrell to get fixated on certain things for a period of time.
Okay.
And it has been other things in the
Yeah.
past. You know, um,
But in any given moment, right? I'm curious about the fixation aspect of it, but like you
hmm,
walk into the convenience store and there is a special quality given to the donuts at this point.
yeah,
Because I venture to say that you're not going in questioning whether to get a magazine or not, or whether to get a Twinkie or a Ho Ho or
no,
a Twix bar or something else.
no,
Like there's a special quality that's being imbued into those donuts that I either have to resist them or, question the thought, or there's an immediately a thought coming up saying, oh, you should have a donut. It's been a while. You should have one. What is it about those donuts that's actually special in this regard from everything else that's at the convenience store that could be just as much something that you are either craving or ignoring the craving of?
I, I'm unable to see anything that's operating on a deeper level. The only answer I have it right now is just it's that particular set of sensations, that
Mhm.
particular set of texture and taste. Um, it's not very helpful, but that's all I've got at the moment.
It's okay. When you get there to the convenience store the next time, notice if those textures and tastes are actually coming to mind when you see the display of them.
Okay.
Because I'm curious what it is about that particular display that is actually tantalizing in any way.
Well, it's not about the display itself. It's just simply about the devil's bread within.
Uh-huh. Devil's bread. That's great. But that's the thing is, again, like we talked about with Tuesday's boyfriend, if you don't have a memory of ever having the devil's bread before,
Ah,
what is it about this particular walking into a convenience store, seeing this thing, and having the mind say, "Oh, you should have one of those." There's a
huh.
reliance on a memory that in the past I have had this
I
felt good, blah 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 blah. What is it promising to do for you that it has supposedly done in the past?
hmm.
Because there is a promise involved, right? Even if it comes down to taste and texture, it's a promise that I will enjoy that. I will have some, better quality in my life if for 5 minutes I have this other taste and texture in my mouth than if I don't.
Well, I think that's what it is. I think it's about the I guess the hit of pleasure. That once you're tasting it and feeling it in the mouth, there's this sort of hmm, feeling.
Mm. Yeah.
And actually, let me qualify that a little bit. There is sometimes that positive, pleasurable feeling. Probably more often than not, there isn't, but it's kind of chasing the dragon. It's being done with the hopes of that. And if it didn't happen this time, which has happened many times,
Yep.
well, maybe next time.
Yeah.
And I
Completely.
wonder if it's not, hey, it's been 4 or 5 days. That's enough for the nervous system to kind of reset. Let's see if this works.
Uh-huh. There very much can be that kind of addictive chasing the dragon quality to it. But underneath that is also still that there's you're tacitly saying that this moment does not have enough sweetness or pleasure or goodness in it.
Mm.
that I need that extra hit from an external source to make me feel that feeling, that I can't get that just by existing. I need the chemical cocktail to go off to make
Mhm.
this moment into something that's much more pleasurable than it currently is. And that's why, that is no different. A donut in that regard is no different from drugs, alcohol, or anything else that we use to change our mental state.
Right.
Sugar can very much be a drug, especially, but
Oh
also
yeah.
anything that we build up in that way, that it gives us that hit of pleasure. I mean, it can be also more like benign things like playing guitar or something. It can, we can still have that if I'm doing it because I get that hit of pleasure out of it. It's serving that purpose of changing our state, which again isn't to say that we should just sit in a cave with no stimulation and that's the ultimate good, but it's just to recognize what it's doing for us and to see, do we actually need that? Can we find ways of finding that contentment and that pleasurability of just being alive in the moment? Usually it comes down to really becoming aware of the minutia of the sensory experience in any given moment. Like,
Hmm.
we tune in to what is actually here in front of us. If we tune out of the thoughts and all of our layers and layers of conceptualization that we usually interact with, as opposed to the actual sensory data that is appearing in any given moment, it tends to come with it what Pernilla always calls the stillness, simplicity, and contentment.
Hmm.
It brings you to that where we're not clinging, we're not craving, we're not avert uh, having aversion towards things. We're simply with the raw experience of color and sound and texture and sensation, and that alone brings oftentimes that feeling of it's like that really nice pleasantness. And we only need those other diversions because we are already one step diverted. We have this like core of simple contentment there, and we overlay that with all of these concepts and filters that keep us from experiencing it. So then to get something that feels almost a little bit like that authenticness, we then use drugs, donuts, something else to give us this kind of feeling of like, oh, okay, yeah, that feels pleasurable for a moment. That feels good. But actually, that core of contentment is under there all the time. That's just a further removed way of accessing something that's like um, a pale simulacrum of what we're actually going for.
Hmm. Well, as you were explaining all of that, or describing all of that, what came to mind was how things were in the house growing up. Um, my mom was very much, I guess we'd probably call her a food addict.
Mm,
Um, and I mean, she was a food addict to the point of, yeah, she was a food addict to the point that at some point in time in, I guess it was the late '90s, my dad came home one day to find her passed out on the kitchen floor, called the medics, and her blood sugar tested somewhere like 200 and something, some outrageously high number. Yeah. Um,
oh, wow.
and so she had to completely overhaul her diet, completely change the way she ate. So anyway, so the house I grew up in, my mom always bought snacks and treats and garbage and what have you, and
Yeah.
um, and I think kids are normally this way, that they tend to get restless and bored pretty quickly. Um, and so when boredom and restlessness would come along, and I couldn't deal with it by some other means, like leaving the house and going and riding a bike, or going to find friends or something, it turned to any of the food my mom had in the
Mhm.
house. And so it was that way for myself and my younger sister in particular. that we kind of followed in her footsteps, and just this habit of consuming whatever was on hand, just kind of out of boredom, lack of something else to do.
Yeah.
And but also it was a way of dealing with things that were uncomfortable. I have this really clear memory of one night I woke up from this really horrible dream. I mean, just this unreal nightmare, which I can't remember what it was now. I just know it was horrifying. And I went upstairs and woke my mom up and let her know I just had this horrible dream. I was freaked out. And she said, "Well, just go to the kitchen and get some grapes and calm down and go back to bed." There we go. That's, you deal with whatever's making you uncomfortable by consuming something.
Yep.
So at least part of that comes down to just training in my environment as a kid, which becomes a habit over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's good to recognize that, like we were talking about, okay, this is the conditioning. So now in this moment, I can question, okay, I'm
Hmm.
feeling stressed. I have an image of a donut in mind. Do those things actually connect? Or is this just the old conditioning that says every time you're stressed, you eat sugar and you feel better? Okay, do I have to actually do that? No, I just feel stress in the body. I just feel this tension. I feel this fluttering. Okay, I can be with that. No, no, a donut does not have to exist in this world. Like it does not have to have any connection to this experience. It's okay. And it's that kind of a thing where we're decoupling that 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 the idea of discomfort or stress or worry or anxiety or fear and a food that is going to in some way make that better. It just doesn't, it doesn't actually have anything to do with it.
Well, now this doesn't mean that there's not some sort of stress or disturbance that is not being perceived. So I'm going to be on the
Mhm.
lookout for that. But at the same time, I'm kind of recognizing now, this is new information for me anyway, um, that there's this idea that you're always supposed to feel good,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
which is not true.
No,
You know,
not possible.
yeah. And so if I'm not feeling good, then I need to do something to correct that because I should feel good.
My,
So,
my my recommendation though is actually to go deeper into those feelings that come out as or that show up as being not good because that's really just a sign that we're not paying attention to what is here. Because
okay.
I do to go back to my little my little visual aid here of that underneath all of the not feeling good, there is that ball of contentment and okay,
Right.
that equanimity that's underneath there, which ironically does actually feel quite nice.
Yeah.
Might not be super overly blown out pleasant, but it might just be like a nice neutrality. Along with all of those concepts that we have that are filtering our general experience, it's also that concept of like I feel something in the body. It's immediately conceptualized as, well, this doesn't feel good. This feels sluggish and tired. This feels a little bit depressed. This feels a little bit stressed out and a little on edge. Whatever it is, it's that layer of conceptualization which we're still interacting with. We're not actually interacting with the feelings of being tired or exhausted or anxious or stressed or depressed. We're avoiding feeling the actual experience of that by just cataloging it with, oh, I know what that is. This is depression. I don't want this. I'm going to go do something else instead. I am feeling, lonely or stressed or whatever. That's only that layer of concept that is too thin. It's too shallow. It's not the actual experience. It's our way of separating ourselves from feeling the experience. So instead of going to the other external uh, solution for it that we think exists, whether it's donuts, drugs, alcohol, meditation, exercise, um, sex, TV, phone, all of those things that we use, food,
Mhm.
all of those things. Instead of going to the external to deflect from it, we go deeper into those sensations of tiredness, depression, anxiety, stress, all of that. And then when your attention is deeply focused on those sensations of what does exhaustion or stress or worry actually feel like? And we put the full catalog of attention on that full attention, all of a sudden that loses that we're going beneath the layer of concepts. So that's no longer present. That conceptual layer is no longer relevant to the experience of what's here. We're below that into just the raw sensation of what's here. And as you start to just kind of become one with or synonymous with that experience of any given moment, including those which we consider depression, anxiety, etc., all of a sudden you find that you start to become overcome by that feeling of pleasant contentment or peace or whatever, even while those sensations are still there. Because instead of having that duality of me versus the sensations in the body, me versus depression, me versus not feeling good enough, now those things, that me is becoming intertwined with the actual raw experience of whatever it was that was underneath what we call not being good enough or depression or anxiety. And all of a sudden you just have that stillness, simplicity, and contentment that's underneath just becomes the totality of the experience. We only have our problems with any given moment when we are relying on our interaction with that conceptual layer that is sort of above all of this, all of the feeling and all of the core of goodness that's in there. Or
So you said the conceptual layer is the layer of anxiety, disappointment, not being good enough, etc.
yeah, it's not the actual experience of it. It's our conceptualization. Like when we just like when we hear a bird, we immediately catalog that, well, that's a bird, I know what that is. And then we work to get underneath that label and just be with the actual tweet tweet sound and just
Mm.
experience the raw sensation, the sound data of tweet tweet. We do the same thing with, as soon as we feel something in the body, like you said, you feel like, or you have felt like you always have to feel good. And if you don't feel good, that's immediately cataloged as this is a bad thing. This is something that I don't want. This shouldn't be here. What is it? Oh, well, I'm feeling really tired. I haven't slept enough. I'm feeling exhausted. I need a coffee. That's going to help the situation. Instead of going to that conceptual layer where I'm labeling what is here, I'm taking in this whole panorama of sensations and everything in the body, and I'm going, this is tiredness. This is exhaustion. Here's my label. And what do I do with exhaustion? I use caffeine. Caffeine
Mm.
gets rid of exhaustion. There we go. Simple. Boop, boop. So now I'm bouncing off the concept back into the external world where I use something else to try to solve the problem that's not getting there.
Huh.
What I'm saying is go below the concept into that root of what does it actually feel like in the body to be tired and exhausted? Can you feel how pleasant that actually is to just feel the heaviness of the body, the sluggishness, the kind of, narcoleptic kind of a feeling? It's just like again, people use drugs to get to that. But if it's in a different context, then that becomes inconvenient and I don't want that. Now I feel like I want to be up and perky. Okay,
Right.
but sometimes now I'm lying in bed and I'm trying to sleep and I'm feeling wired and up and perky. Well, somebody might have just taken a drug to get to that, but now I want to take something else to knock me out so I feel sleepy again. It's always this resistance of what's here to it should be a different way. Now I'm going to use some external substance or something to manipulate my experience to put it the way I think it should be.
Mm.
What we're doing instead is coming to, okay, I first of all accept the fact that this is the way things are. I'm lying in bed. I think I'm supposed to be sleeping. I'm wide awake. Okay, accept that. Now go into the full experience of what it feels like to be wired. What does the body
Hmm.
actually feel like? What does it feel like to have a nervous system that's like on edge and vibrating, and notice all the thoughts that are spiraling, and just be aware of the thoughts. Just be aware of the sensations and really go deep into that sensation of being wired. And then that starts to change the actual experience of it. You start to go below that conceptualization of this is being wired, this is not being able to sleep, this is insomnia, this is a bad thing. And then we get to the, oh, well, isn't this an interesting experience? It's just interesting as it is. And then that starts to give way to that feeling of like, I can be content while I'm not sleeping in bed, feeling this buzzing energy in the body. Or I can be content while I'm, uh, about to go to work, and yet I still feel like, I should be in bed for another 3 hours. Just feeling that heaviness in the body can be a content experience even though I'm moving and doing other things. But first, we have to have that acceptance of the way things are, that I don't need to fix it and make it something else. Then we come more in line with what's here by really becoming ingrained in, enmeshed with the actual raw experience of what's here, as opposed to just bouncing off that conceptual layer of it.
Hmm. Okay. Hmm. It's funny because you're putting the pieces together in a new way. I mean, all of that stuff was I've had experience with those things and even done some of what you described, but I never had put it all together in that way. And so that clarifies things.
Amazing.
Now things are understood in a way that they hadn't been before.
Mm.
Huh. So so the other half of this was around um, what you were just talking about. And so you
Mhm.
answered some of the question because the other day I was trying to write out, try to give some kind of, not sure what the word is for it, trying to just kind of keep track of what's been going on because I've found that by not doing a very good job of keeping track of what's been going on, there have been times where there have been things that have happened, things that were said that it would have been helpful to be able to refer back to, and I didn't have them because I just didn't take the time to write about them. Um, it's like ever since last July, it's been a real crapshoot as to whether or not I'm going to do things that normally I just pretty much did regularly. Just out of habit or for whatever reason, it was just those were um, traits. And keeping up, with a journal was one of them. So I was trying to kind of track all of this or keep track of all of this, and I wasn't sure about what getting back to the primary sensation was about, but that's what you were just describing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was, let me see, there was one part of this that, and you may have touched on this. Okay, so seeing that thoughts are empty and do not require, demand, imply, or in any way mean we must act at all is a start and it makes a big difference. But how is it we can see this and then the mind decides to act and follow that course of action through? Does this mean that we're not seeing fully, completely, and clearly? Does that mean that the insight is incomplete and requires more seeing to deepen the insight? And what I was referring to there was some basically what I was saying earlier, that there are times where um, actually, this is a little bit different because earlier it was, sometimes the mind says, oh, it's okay, let's go ahead and do this. But there are times where, okay, a good example is I really don't need as much caffeine as I'm having. And I'll say, okay, I'm just going to have X amount.
Yeah.
And then I'll get in there and I'll start filling a cup and I'll go, let's get one for later. So now I'm having twice as much. It was already understood that, that's really not in your best interest. Can see that I don't have to do that. That's just a thought. And then in the process of following through on that action, I wind up doing the other thing, instead of getting just, one cup, and, next thing I'm getting two, or I'm doing some other thing that, I'm going further with it than I wanted to or anticipated or had said I was going to. And in the moment, what that looks like is, okay, the thought was seen through. See, it's just a thought. I don't have to do it. I recognize that the impulse and the inner talk comes up. I'm like, yeah, okay, so what? It's just a thought. It doesn't mean anything. It's just noise. And then in an instant, and this goes back to that whole thing about watching how decisions happen in the moment. How are they made? Who's making them? Because in that instant, that thing that decides just decides it's going to do that anyway,
Yeah.
and we're doing it. And
Yeah.
it's a really weird and kind of frustrating thing to watch happen because, I mean, we know there's no central controller,
Yeah.
and that's part of the experience that's frustrating is there's no central controller. So I think I often refer back to this book I had when I was in high school called The Society of Mind by a guy named Marvin Minsky, and he describes how the mind works. Basically he kind of describes the mind as a committee, all these little modules that are based on a variety of things, and they interact. And so in the moment, that thing that's below the threshold of awareness, conscious awareness that decides things, is deciding something that something else in the mind, one of the other committee members or several of the committee members said, no, let's
Yeah.
not. But somebody else, for whatever reason, winds up taking over, and we're doing this thing. And you're watching it happen alone. You're going, no central controller. This is frustrating as hell. There needs to be a central controller because there needs to be somebody to rein in this ridiculous chaos that can't be managed. I mean, we're trying to herd cats mentally.
Yeah, completely. But that's the thing. So and it's funny because I really like even though I have a couple problems with the book, I really like in The Mind Illuminated. He's got that concept of the different boardrooms of things.
Yeah.
And then, it only gets up to consciousness at, a certain level, but there are all these boardrooms of below it of these other sort of like the modules that you just said where
Uh,
all these things are being made underneath the surface and we only become aware of this very small amount at the very end of the process that gets brought up to consciousness.
right.
um but I think that's the thing is that the the each of those modules or each of those little boardroom members, they're not acting in a vacuum. That they
Right.
are those choices that they are popping up as possibilities are there because of all of the past history and all of the things that we feel like are working and all the things that we've talked about in the past. So it's not surprising that those diversions into caffeine or donuts or alcohol or drugs or whatever else our thing is happens for us in a certain way. It would be weird for you if all of a sudden you just, wake up one morning and start having a craving for like betting on horse racing or something, if that had never been a thing, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a thing for a lot of people, but it was not for you because you have these other patterns of behavior that have been found to be useful for your particular brand of deflection.
Mm,
For other people, gambling is their thing, right?
right.
So those modules aren't just like randomly appearing, popping up these random things. It's still because of all
Right.
the causes and conditions of your past history and those. So what we're doing, like with what we keep talking about, is all of this coming back into checking in with, okay, do I need to do this? Does a donut actually relate to my stress? Do I need to actually have that donut just because a thought appears? Even though we can't see the mechanism working in that moment, effectively what we're doing is giving more feedback to those board members all the way down the line so that the
Uh,
next time you go to the convenience store, more of those board members are on the side of, oh yeah, we actually don't need that. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm more interested in that magazine that's over there than that. I'm more interested in that, you know, Slurpee, whatever it is. Like, you know, it's going to come up with different things. The issue is if we're not getting to the root of why it is that I'm having a craving for a donut in the first place because, again, either I'm feeling out of sorts in some way, I'm feeling like I'm undervalued, or I need to treat myself in some way, or I need to do something to perk myself up, or I just really enjoy having this little boost of endorphins or serotonin or whatever when I get it. Um, if we don't if we don't come to the root of that, it will start popping up other options. Like, okay, well, donuts clearly aren't the thing anymore, so let's try cigarettes. Let's go. But it's that sort of thing. You make that face now, but you never know what when we start ticking off all the things that don't work, what will someday start to become. Maybe I could see a little value in that, right? Like,
Hope not.
I hope not too, but it's that sort of thing where the mind doesn't really necessarily care what the diversion object is. It's just whatever might work. And so it's that kind of a process. So what we're doing is basically teaching those board members, like, no, you know what? We don't need this. We don't need that. We don't need that. And then the more we come to that place of finding that sort of central contentment that's in there all the time, those board members lose their jobs. It doesn't have to do what it once did. The need for deflection is no longer there. So they just don't have any purpose anymore. The habit of, like, okay, well, I'll have one cup of coffee now and then find yourself filling up a second coffee for later, that's not happening in a vacuum. That has happened because of so much other stuff, and there are all these other layers underneath that of, expectations about how you're going to feel later on, and that you're going to need this later on, or that, if I'm doing it, I might as well just do it all the way and have two, or we can have all these justifications, but there's something underneath that that's propelling all of this on, and it's never about the caffeine or the coffee. It's about what else is under the surface. And
Right.
so it's true that, there's not a central Darrell in there who is making the decision to fill 2 cups of coffee and then going about their day. But we're without ever knowing what those actual modules or little board members are, we're basically restructuring the system of the corporation that's underneath there, by doing all of these practices that we're doing, by coming to grips with, oh, I'm actually doing this because I feel this way and I'm trying to keep from feeling this way, because I want to manipulate my behavior, because I mean, you've said that in the past, that, like, it's been a long-term thing of constantly wanting to kind of regulate or change the state of mind.
Hmm. Yep.
That does not go away overnight. It just finds new ways of doing it. Meditation is just as much that, and inquiry is just as much that as drugs or alcohol or anything else.
At least inquiry is beneficial.
It is. Well, that's the thing, is we can say that, well, this one is much less detrimental than the other one. This one has many more benefits to me. But if we're coming at it from that same, it can still be used in the same way. It can
Hmm.
still be used from that same starting point of, I need to feel good all the time. I need to be in some altered state because whatever is here now, when I'm not doing non-duality or I'm not drunk, is not okay. This by itself, it's not good enough. I need something else. That's the core philosophy that's underneath both the striving for enlightenment or the striving for being plastered.
It seems though that you could kind of harness that, and let's say you're using inquiry or meditation, and the drive, the motivation behind it is not so, for lack of a better word, wholesome,
Mm.
but use that to get yourself further down the road while doing these other things that you described. And then when you get to the point that you've gotten under the surface and you see what's going on there and you've dealt with that, then you can drop the meditation or the inquiry or whatever you've used. It's, kind of the old Buddhist metaphor about, dropping the raft when you get to the other
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
I mean, am I wrong?
No, no, no. There is some truth to that, and
Okay.
it isn't to say that meditation or inquiry is necessarily a bad thing either.
Oh, I didn't think so.
Yeah, no, and again, there is a it's really for our own development or introspective growth to just recognize the reason why we're doing the thing. It might be that we also just really enjoy meditation and that it's not being used as deflection, in which case that's great. But it's we have a sort of a, a preloaded assumption in especially in the Western world and in this sort of thing that like meditation and exercise and those things are always good. It's great to exercise, it's great to meditate, it's great to become calm in the mind and all that. We ignore the fact, though, that that can also be used as a deflection or an escape or to keep from
Right.
feeling something we don't want to feel. And that it might not have, as you said, the most wholesome roots, even though it's something that we consider to be generally a good thing. So it's important to have that honesty with ourselves of like, why am I actually doing this thing that is seemingly wholesome? It seemingly has a good, beneficial quality. My body will feel better. I'll feel calmer of mind. I'll, be more pleasant to be around. But is that really why you're doing it? Or are you doing it because you're just trying to escape something that's actually here that you are not comfortable allowing to be here? Is it that I think I will be a better person if I am in shape and not yelling at my spouse. Is it that, great for them to not be yelled at by me, but it's really about how I see me. I'm going to feel like I'm much more enlightened if I'm not yelling at them than, we have a lot of these things which are so self-serving that it's not to belittle it or put it down, but it's just to become really aware of why are we actually doing the things that we do?
Hmm.
What's the motivation?
Well, it reminds me of Susanna likes this guy Christopher Wallace, and I don't know if where she got it from in his book or webpage or whatever. He describes how he recommends to people to go, I think, 7 days without anything. You don't, unless you have to make a phone call, you don't use your phone. You don't turn on the TV. You don't read books.
Mm.
You only eat. You're making sure you're not eating for entertainment. You're just
Yeah,
eating enough to sustain yourself. And so for that 7 days, all of the distractions and diversions
yeah,
are completely put aside. So basically, you're spending a lot of time just sitting
yeah,
around
yeah,
because you're not letting yourself get into anything that can distract you in any way at all.
yeah,
And, he said most people can't hack it. Most people
yeah.
can't get through more than a day or so.
No, that's
And there's apparently one woman who went quite a ways with it, and she just became intensely uncomfortable. I mean, she just kind of went to the point of almost kind of drove her nuts.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Susanna was telling me about this, and I thought, wow, it sounds like a worthy endeavor. But at the same time, it also reminds me of, we talked sometime recently about, the Buddhist Dhutanga practices, not sitting in chairs, not sleeping in a bed.
yeah, yeah,
And it sounds like the same kind of thing, a pretty hardline approach. But um, what I'm getting from this is that we have to do something about these distractions and diversions.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's all keeping us from, ironically, that contentment that can be there when we are just present. They're the diversions are basically lying to us.
Hmm.
It The need for diversion, I should say, is lying to us. The diversions themselves are just kind of these benign things that happen to be there.
Right?
A donut is not in itself duplicitous or, conniving or anything. Like it's just sugar and flour, really. Like,
Right.
just it is what it is.
Stay away from the donuts. I'll lie to you.
Exactly. Exactly. But but it is funny because we do talk about these things like that, right? Like
Yeah.
the devil's bread. There
Yeah.
is something about like there's like an inherent danger to this
Right.
thing. By itself, it's completely inert. There is no
Yeah.
actual danger to a donut. Um, but it's the idea that we have to that diverting from um this experience is going to be the thing that makes us happy is the lie. It's where the um uh the incorrect conclusion is happening. We
Uh,
It's that idea that the only way out is through. It's
okay.
coming from it's that same sort of idea that instead of finding peace and contentment and happiness through external means where we have to deflect from feeling the discomfort that's here. I need that external thing, which is promising some sort of beneficial change, even if it's only for 5 minutes, it's still a beneficial change. What we really want to do is to go through the
Huh.
unpleasantness. We want to go deeply into the unpleasant in order to find that core of contentment and peace that's underneath there.
So then it's not necessary to completely eschew and set aside all diversion and distraction for 7 days. Just by going deeply into it, we can get it more or less to the same place.
And it can be a really, yeah, I think it would actually be a really interesting experience to feel in within that the first hour of doing that. You're gonna feel a lot of discomfort. And
Mm-hmm.
instead of rejecting the discomfort that's there and then feeling that like because when we do that it feels like this externally imposed restriction. Even if
Right.
I say I'm going to do it, it's like, oh, but I really want to look at my phone. It's like like I'm doing it but you're forcing me to do this. There's like that kind of a feeling about it. And if instead we just come down to how is the body really feeling? This discomfort, this wanting to do something, and that restlessness that's like just can you go deep into that restlessness? Really get engaged with it. Really feel what's there. Well, now does that actually seem as uncomfortable as it once did? Do you really have to divert yourself from this restlessness, or can you go through that too?
Well, that brings up one thing that um, I've noticed is that when some things have come up that are uncomfortable or unpleasant, um, and I go in when I try to go in as fully or deeply into that sensation as I can, that after putting the attention into that for a couple of minutes, let's say I can't think of a good actual example of something I've actually done, but there have been times where it's something really uncomfortable, like maybe I don't know, you know, it's really hurting from something someone said, perhaps,
Mm.
and then okay, all right, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go somewhere in the house, get by myself, and sit down and just get into that as fully as I can, and then I get into it, and then it's, well, where is it? Because the thing I notice is that it can be really uncomfortable, but then when I try to get into it, it seems like it's kind of smoke and mirrors because I get into it, I'm like, well, where is it? Like, okay, hold on a minute. There's that sensation in the chest. That sensation is kind of uncomfortable. All right, but that's still not the sum total of whatever it was I thought that I was experiencing a minute ago. So where the heck is it? Go looking further, like it's nowhere. Where in the heck is it? I can't find it.
Exactly. That's that mirage of that conceptual layer that I was talking about. You're going beneath that conceptual layer of what you thought it was into the actual experience of
The
what
actual experience is far less substance.
exactly. And then
Okay.
underneath that is that core of contentment.
I thought I was doing something wrong or missing something this whole time. It's
Nope.
like, where is
That's
it? What am I missing?
That's the whole point. That's why we say craving doesn't exist, and depression, as we think of it, doesn't exist, and anxiety doesn't actually exist. All of these things that we think exist are just the conceptualizations, the raw, gross exaggerations or oversimplifications of a constantly changing group of sensations and thoughts.
So is that why then I'm noticing the either the absence or the diminution of um, uh, emotional responses and reactions that I was talking about earlier?
Yeah, it's very, very likely because you're coming down past where the emotional response is often a reflection of I think I'm feeling depressed. And so I'm going to respond to that in some way that I'm used to always. Every time I'm feeling depressed, then I leads me to think about my situation, and I get, down these maudlin side tracks of rumination and all of this stuff. It's because we're only interacting with that layer of conceptuality. And
Right.
so the more you get down to that, yeah, there isn't really emotions themselves do not exist either. An emotion is nothing but a sensation and a thought. And the more
Right.
we are dissecting those and breaking them into their parts, there is nothing there to hold on to. There's no actual emotion that is in itself a real thing. It's just a passing flurry of sensation and associated thoughts.
I need to be doing more of this. I mean, I'm doing some, but I need to be doing more.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties into, I guess what you were. I think it ties into what you were saying earlier when you're asking, what purpose does, in this case, the donut. But I mean, let's just say distraction diversion. What purpose does the distraction and diversion serve? What does it represent?
Yeah.
Um, what is it promising to do for you? Um, I, I mean, am I on the right track? That's what those are about. That same thing, getting underneath the words fail me.
Yeah. Mine also too. That's okay.
But those questions you asked, which I wrote down,
Yeah.
um, that's what the idea behind asking those questions and actually finding the answers to them is about. Um, uh, Getting to um, bring it to a point where we see the mirage for what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. And yeah, and some of the well, I guess there's two parts. There's that kind of mirage aspect that we've been talking about,
Mhm.
all of the emotions and stuff that might be there and whether they're actually real or not. And the other is that you have that it's the sort of unconscious beliefs that can be there, which can also be fueling what we take to be those emotions, right? So
Huh.
you start with like an
Yes.
unconscious belief, right? That, for instance, the world is unsafe, or um, I'm I'm not okay the way I am. I need to be different, or
Yeah.
nobody values me. That's another good one for people. Um, so you walk into the store and you see a pack of donuts, and the though you might not be aware of it, what can be triggered is this feeling of nobody values me, but I'm going to value myself and buy that pack of donuts.
Okay.
So that underneath thing might be that feeling of not being valued, might then trigger a sensation in the body, some sort of emotion that we call, um, I don't know, loneliness, sadness, feeling of, not being good enough, or
Right.
needing something, right? That feeling of, a lot of times we have that like unnamed need for something. It's like that feeling of like a vacancy. There's a void that needs to be filled, and I don't really know what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's a donut-sized void. So that's probably going to do it. It's that feeling that we have. And so if we just operate from that conceptual layer of I need something, or I need to give myself a treat, or I need to show myself I value me by eating a donut, or I need to, do this kindness, or however we justify it, that's all because we're interacting with that initial label, or the conceptual level of that feeling of need or vacancy or loneliness or sadness or not being good enough or whatever. And then, like you said, we go into the raw sensation. I'm standing in the convenience store and I'm feeling this feeling of need and loneliness. What does that actually feel like? Go down in that second that you're standing there, tap into the body and feel, what does it actually feel like to be lonely or undervalued or in need? And just feel that the actual sensory data of those whatever's in the body right now, and recognize that as the mirage that isn't actually need or craving or being not good enough or any of those labels that we put on it. It is simply some constellation of sensations happening in the body.
And then whatever your mind is concocting about that.
Exactly. And then you can see, okay, those donuts have no correlation to this at all.
Now, in the short term, while working with that and coming back to that I guess we'll call it a practice. In the short term, um, when it comes to doing something that is not preferred, like grabbing the second cup of coffee, is it
Mhm.
simply just a matter of what you had suggested before, that when the urge comes up, pause, like stop, don't act on it, put it put it aside for a second, in order to try to kind of get in front of it so
It-
that we can um, work with the thought aspect of it.
yeah, if you can, then yes. If you
Okay.
have that opportunity before the action has happened, to pause, then by all means, you remember to do it, you pause, see what's there. Okay. Feel into it. See also if there are thoughts about like with the second cup of coffee, there's a pouring of a one cup and then a okay, well, then I'll do one for later. Was there something in that gap between point pouring the one and point pouring the second that is
Hmm.
saying about like why do you need the one in the future, later in the day? Were there thoughts about, well, I will be blah, 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 and so I need it? Is there something that's filling that gap that
Usually,
is making that second one happen?
yeah.
So then questioning those thoughts. Okay, is this, I'm attempting to provide for a future that is not here. Is my assumption really true? Right? Like how valid is this assumption that I'm going to need the second cup of coffee by then? But also, if you have that moment of space to look at it and you know that I'm trying to limit to just one cup a day, why am I really looking for that second cup of coffee? Is this just an old behavioral pattern that's coming out that being altered mentally is a good thing? And you know, I can get away with this one. This one's
Yeah.
legal. It's safe. I can do it. It's fine. Is that part of what's underneath the justification?
Well, that's at least part of a more honest answer than the idea that I'll be tired, because there have been plenty of times when I'm going to get more caffeine and there's this recognition of you're not tired.
Yep. Yep. So it's really about that wanting to change experience.
Yes.
So you can either do that externally with all of the things that you've used in the past to do that, and you
Mhm.
currently use to do that, or you can become so absolutely present with whatever is actually in the moment that it doesn't need to change. Ironically, that does also alter your perception of it because,
Yeah.
but it does it in a way where it's much more authentic with what's here. And it's not just,
Yes.
a passing diversion from it. Because again, you're only ever diverting from the conceptual layer. Any time that you do all of those things, caffeine or whatever else, it's only because you're deflecting from the concept of what's here, not because you're deflecting from the actuality of what is here.
Hold on, let me think about that. Deflecting from the concept of what's here, not deflecting from the actuality. Okay.
In other words, you're deflecting from the anxiety that you feel, but you're deflecting from the concept of anxiety, but not from the
Not the
actual
actual experience.
sensation of, yeah, exactly. The actual experience of it is not what you're really deflecting from. It's the idea that this is anxiety, this is bad, I can't handle this, I've had anxiety before. Okay, but have you actually sat with the raw sensations of anxiety? What
Okay.
is it that we call anxiety? And then that starts to pull apart because now we realize that anxiety was actually a lot of mental shit also. And it's coming up with all of these, well, what ifs and all of that. If we're not in that lost in that mind realm of imagination, and we're back in the body, and we're back in the actual sensory experience of just sweaty palms and bubbling stomach and racing heart rate. Well, can you just feel the interesting sensations of all of those components by themselves? Again, people take drugs to get these sensations. Like,
Right.
it's, people actively search out these same sensations. So can you like pretend that you wanted this for a moment and just be with what is actually here?
Yeah. I mean, I'm willing to do it. I'm honestly, there's this sense of being really tired of, kind of worn out with the use of various distractions and diversions,
Yeah.
going to external things to try to alter things to be more in line with the way that they're believed to need to be. That really is, it's just so, to use a phrase someone I used to know would use, they would say, I'm so over it, you know?
Completely.
I
Yeah.
really am. I'm just, it is just ready to, um, say goodbye to all of that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. Completely get that.
So, and like you said, the doing it the way that we're talking about is much more authentic,
Yeah.
you know?
It brings you to the actual reality as best as we can experience it of the given moment instead of deflecting from it and then, you know, I know I keep using this metaphor, but it's that we're it seems to be a good one. I'm going to stick with it. So
Works.
it's we already live a life that is so shallow in terms of our interactions with things.
Yeah.
It is so just working with the surface layer of everything. And so then deflecting from that, using other ways of manipulating our experience, is just a layer even above the surface layer. It's like being out in the atmosphere as opposed to really being in the core of the experience.
Right.
And so we're just coming down through that, out of the atmosphere, through that conceptual layer that's there into the ground of what's really here. And that's never the problem. The being the actual experience is always manageable and interesting and often kind of pleasurable. It's just that we have all of these uh, um, prejudices against it. We have these stereotypes of how we think our experiences are and should be, and we react to the stereotype as opposed to the actual experience.
Well, you're talking about unconscious beliefs, and it's not really unconscious now, but that belief about how things should be,
Hmm. Yep.
that's something that's been overlooked.
Yeah.
So,
And we operate out of that. And it's funny because we all have sort of a different version of what that is, but we still have, we operate out of our own version of how things should be all the time. And when they're not that way, I need to do something external to make it into that. I need to get a better job. I need to become enlightened. I need to, yeah, get in a relationship. I need to find something because that's going to fix it. If I just manipulate my external surroundings enough, then the internal experience will come in line and that'll be okay. And it never works that way.
that, yeah, that's doomed to failure.
It is. Especially because, like we talked about at the very beginning, there is nothing that is predictable or consistent or that we can, nothing is permanent. We can't rely on any external circumstance to give us long-lasting peace and comfort. The only thing we are guaranteed to always have as long as we are alive is present experience. As long as we are breathing, there is some form of present experience. And if we can get completely in tune with that and find that peaceful contentment that is at the core of every present experience, then it doesn't actually matter what happens in the external world. That's where that true equanimity comes in. that our relationships can fall apart, our houses can fall down, our jobs can be lost, everything can just go to absolute hell. And if you're okay with your internal experience of it in this present moment, then in that moment, it is all okay. You don't have to be swept away by the flood of all of the thoughts and the emotions and all of the worries and concerns because all of that is in the head. We have that sanctuary of actual peace and contentment, which is underneath every sensation ever, always, until we die.
Hmm, man, it's so simple but so heavy.
Yeah, yeah. But
So,
it's there.
yeah,
And
no,
really what we avoid are, it's just we're just distracting ourselves from it all the time.
well, that's sort of the disconcerting thing is that the idea of living a life where you're constantly running from one thing to another to try to get away from this one thing that if you can get to it, um, will give you a more reliable foundation.
Yeah.
So, so let me ask you one other thing real quick.
Yeah.
Those affirmations are starting to get kind of weird,
Okay.
you
Good.
know, because I'll still, something will happen, and like the things with Tuesday,
Yeah.
and I'll go to the affirmations, and more often than not, especially that first one, gosh, now I can't think of the exact wording, but um, that you're worthy of being here exactly as you are. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, who? Who is it that's even saying it? It seems so empty.
Yeah.
You
Good.
know?
And that's the thing is they're good to fulfill a need, and then once that need is fulfilled, then they can be discarded.
Well, I think there's still a need for it, but it's hard to put it into use to fill that need when it's said out loud or even in the mind that the mind starts looking for who is this that we're even talking about, and of course it's always perfectly clear that that person that we're talking about isn't there. There's just a body and there's this mental stuff, but it's not a particular located someone.
Yeah. Well, think about it this way. So if the need is still there, then instead of going to the inquiry side of things where we're questioning, well, wait a minute, who am I actually looking at? Think of it this way. You're talking to all of those members in the boardrooms, all below there.
Ah, okay.
It's going into the subconscious. So it doesn't matter that there isn't actually a unified Darrell who's at the CEO of the company who's running all of this stuff. For all of those little board members, some of them still need to hear this. Some of them are still operating from the premise that, you know, Corporation Darrell is not okay. Corporation Darrell has some issues, and we have to shore up those issues any way we can, you know.
Okay.
And so they need some convincing that Corporation Darrell is a great entity
Okay.
because they're still operating out of the idea that there is, right? They're doing something to promote the the well-being and the continuation of the organism. And however, each one of those modules happens to believe that this organism exists, however it thinks it whatever it thinks it needs to be the best it can be, it's going to do it. So these affirmations are really rooted to those little guys who are like, okay,
Okay.
okay, I get that. Yep, he's okay. He's okay. I can lay back. I'm okay. I don't have to send up that flare every time something says something that triggers that old, feeling. Like it's okay. It's okay.
Okay,
So
I can work with that.
good.
And in fact, that's what I needed to hear because that's going to work better than the way that it had been understood for a while now, for
Good.
however many months. So,
Yeah.
all right,
It's
I
just
can deal with
it's
that.
just dropping pebbles into the lake and just letting the ripples kind of happen. You don't have to worry about the fact that it's all just individual molecules of water, that there are no actual ripples there. Each one is just just one individual little molecule. It can't possibly ripple. You don't have to go that deep into it, right?
Right.
Just no, no, just look at
Okay.
the pretty ripples. It's okay. Just drop them in, let it do its thing.
Um, all right. That works. I don't see that posing any problems. Um, yeah, I mentioned that book, The Society of Mind, and I don't remember when this was. This has been some time ago now. I know that I got to looking. I think it was at the suggested reading or bibliography in the back of The Mind Illuminated, and Chuladasa actually has that book listed.
Oh,
So I was
interesting.
kind of surprised. Not surprised. uh, I wasn't expecting it, but it
Yeah,
made sense in light of how he describes things. Like,
totally.
oh, all right, so he's seen that one too.
Yep. That totally makes sense then. Yeah, and I like
Yeah,
that. I like that metaphor a lot. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, he keeps it very simple and kind of reframes it in a way that first of all simplifies it so that it's not so complex. But for someone like you and I,
Yeah.
taking a look at that book um, might be enjoyable and
Yeah.
possibly useful. Of course, I mean the idea is basically out there anyway, but to see how the author of that book, I mean the detail he goes into and
Yeah.
the level of detail in explaining how these layers and how it's all built up. I mean it was a pretty mind-boggling book.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's super interesting. I'll have to check that out. Is that
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that one?
Yeah, I mean it's been around forever. I mean, I came across it in half price books sometime in the mid to late '80s, and I saw
Oh
it.
wow.
Oh,
Oh,
that's God never. To my 16, 17-year-old self, it was kind of shocking. It's like God, I never
wow.
thought of it like this. You
That's
know,
amazing. I wonder how the science of it holds up, given new
I
neuroscience.
wonder. That's a good question, huh?
Because I know, like, something that I've heard recently is that they were talking about that there used to be the thoughts that, independent sections of the brain kind of worked, like you'd have just the cortex that was for the visual aspect, the element, and one that deals with speech and all that. And what they're finding now is that it's really networks that work together and that it's non, you know,
He actually, I think he was probably ahead of his time because
interesting.
what he describes in that book is more in line with that. In line is more in line with the idea of networks.
That's
All these
interesting.
little groups that connect and work. Simple modules that can connect to
Yeah.
form more complex modules and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Sounds right.
Yeah.
So super
So,
interesting.
well, all right, man.
This has been great.
It
Oh,
has been. I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
no, no, I was just going to say this is completely an aside, but uh, if you made me think of this before, if you have a thing for licorice, don't go to Denmark because that will be your absolute kryptonite. Like it will break you. There's those people, the Danes love their licorice more than anybody in the world. It is remarkable. There's licorice everything, licorice ice cream, licorice beer, licorice.
Oh, wow.
It is in everything, and I actually love licorice, so I very much enjoyed it. But yeah, it was just making me think of that when you were saying that because
I'd be very content there because I mean that's the real stuff. What we're
it's yeah
getting, it's slowly being replaced with that Australian abomination.
yeah.
You
I
know,
haven't tried it, but I've heard like so much, and I don't know like what the
it's
difference is.
not. I
Okay,
can't explain it. I just know I tried it once. I was kind of having a hankering for licorice, or at least, well, really, what was happening was I saw the packaging and I thought, it stimulated that desire for it, and
yeah.
so I bought a package of it and one piece, and I was like, "This is terrible. This isn't
Oh
licorice.
no.
This is some sort of black abomination." Um,
It's funny because we tried Trader Joe's has a black licorice and
uh-huh.
tried it and took one piece and was like, nope, that's going back. Like that is that is not okay.
Yeah, so there's
But
this move towards something. I think it's trying to make licorice more palatable for everyone else. It's like either you
yeah,
like it or you don't. If
exactly.
you don't like it, find something else. Leave the actual stuff for the rest of us to do.
Exactly. One of my best friends who hates it said that it tastes like the 1800s.
That's a great description. It tastes like the 1800s. Well, the 1800s are delicious.
Completely. I'm totally on board with the 1800s thing. Yeah.
I like the
But
1800s. So.
yep. So yeah, so I'm on board with it. In fact, it's funny because Pernilla's mom sent us a Christmas gift, which was basically like I don't even know, probably 5 pounds of licorice. Like it was like
Yeah,
it was a big box of a couple different types of licorice.
that's
So
great.
very sweet. Yeah,
I'm lucky to be to be married to people who are from a culture that values real, honest to God licorice.
absolutely. Yeah, I really enjoyed when I was there. There was like, I mean, every store that you go into, it's just like there's so many different varieties of licorice on the shelves. Like it's everywhere.
God, I can see what you mean when you said it would break you. I
It
mean,
would break you. Yeah, you would be like, in an absolute downward spiral of just licorice over. You'd probably end up in the hospital from your blood pressure going, through the roof because of the licorice effects. But
and return, and everyone wonders why my skin is darkened.
completely.
That's great.
Good stuff. Anyway, it made me think of that when we were talking about
Yeah,
licorice.
that's great.
That is that is
And I had no idea. I really didn't. I had no idea. I had no idea where it originated from. I'd never even thought to look.
I actually don't know if it originated there. I for some reason actually think it's German, but Pernilla will correct me on that. Don't quote me on that. But
Okay.
it happens to be a place where they absolutely like it's a rare bastion of love for licorice in Denmark.
I knew it was. I knew it originated from somewhere over in that general vicinity. I just didn't know
Yep.
where specifically.
Yeah.
Come on. Speaking of things that are black,
Not much less tasty though.
yeah. Well, she's sweet in her own way.
Ah,
Um, so anyway, but I wanted to tell you these. I have been listening to the last 3 or 4 sessions. Once we really started to get more deeply into 4 and 5, I just keep listening to them over and over. I mean, I mean, all the earlier sessions are great too, but it's sort of like those earlier sessions all were somehow um, a foundation for the way things have taken off. And it's like every time we meet, it just keeps getting better. It just keeps
amazing.
getting better. And it feels like, well, something's obviously happening,
Yeah.
because, like I said at the beginning of all of this, a lot of times there aren't reactions. When there are, there every now and then get something that's, kind of more or less full blown the way it always has been. But a lot of it is really uh, uh, reduced.
Wonderful.
It doesn't have the intensity or duration that it used to.
Yeah.
So
Excellent.
something is clearly happening, and it's been weird. It's like I wrote to you in that email, and your response was great, because that's, it does feel kind of like living with one foot one foot's in the way it was, and one foot is into something else, and it's very obvious, it's very noticeable, but yet it's also subtle enough that find I find myself asking, is this really happening? Am I misperceiving things, or is this really what's happening? Yeah, that's really what's happening.
Yeah.
So, it's just kind of slowly evolving and developing. And
Amazing.
yeah, it
And
really is. It
it's
really
really
is. It's quite a
how it
ride.
works. Yeah. Yeah, it's how it works. It's just we're becoming more and more aware and changing the patterns of behavior. And it doesn't always happen in some big explosive shift. It just becomes like a gradual life change.
More and more, I've come to the opinion over the last year or so that those sudden, big Kinshow, whatever moments
Mhm.
are the very much the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
But those are dramatic, so those get a lot more attention.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think a lot of times people get those and it's not really a shift. It's just a peak
Yeah,
experience where if you don't integrate what's there, it's just like an acid trip, had some fun experience, you saw some weird things, and then you're back to normal.
right.
So it really comes down to how it affects going forward and what the ramifications of it are.
Yeah, and the few that I've had, there was one that was very significant that kind of got the ball rolling, and there have been others over time since then. I've come to think of those really more as previews of what it can be like
Yeah.
if it's really pursued to its, I'll put it in quote marks, conclusion.
Yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
really not a conclusion, but
Right,
if
totally.
it's pursued as far as you can go with it,
Yep.
this is an approximation of what it can look like.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I just think of them as previews.
I love that idea. That's a better way of looking at it because a lot of people take that preview as being the end. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, yep, saw it, done now. And then they go about a life that's still filled with reactivity and suffering and all sorts of,
yep,
unnecessary chaos.
absolutely. Why am I still suffering?
Exactly.
Yeah. Man,
Thank you.
thank you.
It's been really great.
That has. It really has. I mean, every time now for a while, it's just, I don't even know what to say about it. It's just, who'd have thunk? Who'd have thunk? It's just, wow, how amazing. You know,
Such a great ride to be on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Thank you
I'll
so
see you on
much
the
again.
24th. Well, thank you.
Look
Really.
forward to seeing you then. Yeah.
Okay.
Happy New Year.
You too. And I'll talk to
See
you
you
after a
soon.
while.
Yep.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.